Listener-supported St. Gabriel Catholic Radio AM 820 brings you Family Sanctuary, a show that inspires living the gospel message in word and deed within our families. And now, Family Sanctuary with host Peggy Hartshorn.
Welcome to the Family Sanctuary, focusing on life-giving relationships and the family. I'm your host, Peggy Hartshorn, chairman of Heartbeat International, that advances life-affirming pregnancy help around the world. And today, we have a wonderful guest with us, Marie Meaney. Welcome, Marie.
Hi, Peggy. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for being our guest. And Marie is an expert, actually, in so many areas. Today, she's going to be speaking to us particularly. We're continuing a discussion on infertility and her book, When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope. And today, we're going to be focusing on alternatives to the artificial reproductive technology, particularly in vitro fertilization, that is almost always the first alternative presented to people who are suffering from infertility. So it's a very timely program. IVF has been in the news very much lately, and we need as Christian listeners, Catholic listeners, to understand what is it. And why does the Catholic Church take a very strong position against artificial reproductive technologies like IVF? But let me first introduce again our guest, Marie Meaney, Dr. Marie Meaney. She is the author of the book I mentioned, When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope. And she's a specialist on the French philosopher and mystic Simone Weil. She's written several books. She holds a graduate degree in modern languages and philosophy from Oxford University and the International Academy of Philosophy in Liechtenstein. She's multilingual. She's written in several different languages, but don't let that be intimidating because Marie is a wonderful, wonderful Catholic woman who just speaks to the heart as well as the head. And she's just a great source of inspiration for me and for many others in particularly in her journey of infertility and her expertise in helping people choose life-giving alternatives to artificial reproductive technology. So Marie, welcome again, and thank you for being with us for our second program.
Not at all. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit first about infertility in general. How common is infertility? I think in the pro-life movement, we have seen statistics that maybe, well, you tell me, what a number of couples are facing infertility today?
Okay. So it's about 1 in 4.
1 in 4. That's what I was thinking. We've heard in the pro-life movement. I wanted to make sure that's generally correct.
So it doesn't mean necessarily that these couples will never have children or that it's continuous infertility. They may have children and then have secondary infertility, not have as many children as they want, or it may just last a few years and then the spell is broken and they can have children for the first time or again. So it just covers the fact that about 1 in 4 couples will face this challenge at some point.
And usually aren't they considered to have an infertility issue with maybe 1 or 2 years of trying to get pregnant and they're not pregnant yet? 1 or 2 years they're considered to have an infertility problem?
Yeah, so it's often 1 year.
1 year.
And actually, when you're older, strangely enough, the doctors calculate that it's already after 6 months because it tells them that something needs to happen. So that's the way it's rather than saying, well, you're older, it's going to take you more years, they rather say, well, we need to start acting earlier. So you're already after half a year, you're considered suffering from infertility.
Okay, and many women are wanting to get pregnant at an older age because the age of marriage has gone up. Often people postpone children because of career issues or financial desire to have a nest egg, whatever causes them to decide not to attempt to have children. Of course, the massive use of contraceptives and so forth. People sometimes are told this is the smart thing, don't
Yeah.
get pregnant now. And they automatically think, well, when I want to be pregnant, I'll of course be able to get pregnant
Yeah.
quickly.
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So, and the other problem that we're facing, I think, with so many people suffering from infertility is that uh, they don't get good referrals for good medical care. Sometimes the infertility is caused by something that is somewhat easily correctable, but they don't get that good referral, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the first thing that couples are proposed, and even
IVF
yeah,
or
IVF,
artificial.
exactly.
Mhm.
And even when they, for example, they've had one miscarriage. Well, one miscarriage, though very sad, don't get me wrong, but that sort of means most of the time, well, you are fertile. This is sad, but you probably will manage to have another pregnancy and have a fair chance of having a baby, a live baby in your arms at the end. But I know women who immediately then race to IVF because this hasn't worked, or women who then do IVF, have a child, and then afterwards conceive on their own, which clearly shows that they didn't need this. I mean, if we're just talking in a sort of morally neutral realm, just in terms of reasonability. And those couples who've gone through it, it's not an enjoyable procedure. It's not a walk in the park. Nobody would really lightheartedly, and people don't, I think, go into it hopefully thinking this is going to be easy, but certainly by the end of it, they know that this has been a grueling experience.
Yes.
And it's not one that they've simply been willing to take upon themselves because they've been promised a baby at the end, which they may or may not then have.
Sure. Let's explain what IVF really is. What does it entail? How in vitro fertilization, what does that mean for the husband and the wife or the couple who are trying to go through it? What do they have to do? And what do these scientists and lab technicians do to create an embryo?
Yes. So you need to get the gametes, that means the eggs from the woman and the semen from the husband, and you will get them together in a lab. But how do you first get them? So for the woman, so normally in every cycle, she produces an egg and perhaps two, but you want to get a lot more. I mean, the doctors want to get a lot more to have a higher probability of having a baby in the end. So what they will do is give very strong hormones, high dosage of hormones to the woman, and that is very unpleasant because their emotions are all over the place. She's probably been going through infertility for some time, so her emotions are anyway pretty raw, and now she has to go through that. So it does a whole lot of things to her body. So, and it's not without danger, because certain women have a kind of reaction that can be life-threatening, and then they have to stop. So they have to be closely monitored to see if this is going the right way, because otherwise they might have this it's called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So anyway,
it's hormonal treatments, correct? Estrogen. It's hormonal treatments,
yes,
estrogen.
It's the hormonal treatments. Yeah, it's estrogen. And then if all goes well, then the doctors remove the eggs, and then the husband needs to give his sperm. And how is that done? Well, he goes into the in vitro clinic, and he's either given porn or is encouraged to watch porn on his phone, and in order to masturbate. And that's just an incredibly awful thought in of itself. You're trying to conceive a child in a loving way, and the couple is not coming together, and the woman is going through this terrible hormonal therapy, and then her husband has to masturbate watching probably porn in a room. His wife, if she's there, is not supposed to touch him, so that nothing gets contaminated. And even men say how unpleasant that is, and they really dislike it. And then when they have the gametes of both, then they're put together in a petri dish and left to wait and see what happens. And then they're monitored by technicians in the lab who look at them. Are they developing? Are the cells dividing? And then after, between 3 to 5 days, they decide which ones look the most promising. So you'll have this procedure where you say, well, some look more viable, some look more healthy, and the others are destroyed, killed. and then you may have more than you need, so then those are frozen, and a few are implanted in the woman.
And sometimes aren't they now testing? I mean, you can say, I only want a male, or I only want a female, or
exactly.
And I think even now sometimes they're able to determine eye color. They're doing other kinds of tests besides tests for male female. It's into designer babies, right?
It's into designer babies, absolutely. And of course, some couples are worried about certain kinds of genetic illnesses, perhaps because they run in the family or because they're just generally afraid, and they can have that tested as well. So so you're getting the kind of baby that you want, and of course we see the direction this is going in, as you were mentioning, Peggy.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few of those babies are implanted, and then you wait and see. And often it doesn't work, and
most often it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the mother loses her children, and then you have to start again, or you use some of the frozen embryos, and you hope that it's gonna work the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the chances of success have gone up a lot. So now you have I think 36% chance in the first cycle of having a viable baby. Mm-hmm. But even that, so it's only about 1/3 of a chance. So it's highly likely that you'll have to go to a second and the third cycle.
And of course, one of the other things, if multiple embryos are implanted, which they generally are, to make sure that they have some success. If several of the babies begin growing, let's say 4 or 3, they will convince the parents that in order to have a more likelihood of 1 or 2 babies born healthy, we need to selectively abort some of the other embryos that are growing in the womb already.
Absolutely. And that also tells you something about how life is treated.
Mm-hmm.
These precious babies that you've wanted for so long, you're willing to kill some of your children to assure the survival of others.
Sure.
How awful.
And some of the testimonies of women who have gone through this and had to make those decisions. There are women who have testified how traumatic the whole experience is, particularly if they've been required or urged to abort some of these babies that are growing in their womb in order to have 1 or 2 that have a better chance of survival through the entire pregnancy. So, it's so many aspects of that process are so against the dignity of the human person, both the woman and the man, the couple, as well as the poor children involved. Yeah. Well, Marie, we're about halfway through our program. I want to introduce our guest, Dr. Marie Meaney, who's written a beautiful book, When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope, by Emmaus Road, emmausroad.org. She is an expert in philosophy, theology, has a personal expert in having experienced infertility and secondary infertility. And Marie, let's focus the rest of our discussion on, of course, we've already touched on why is the Catholic Church so opposed to these artificial means of conception. Our program is titled IVF, Why Not? So why not IVF?
Yeah. Exactly.
If we haven't already convinced people that it's not a good alternative, why not in a moral and spiritual perspective?
Yeah. So let me just first of all clarify something. People often have the wrong impression that the church is against science, and the church is not against science. They're in favor of it. Our university is the starting of the university is to the church and their promotion of science. But it's only so they look at science. The church looks at science, saying, is it science that respects the dignity of the person, that is in line with what the human person deserves and requires, or not? And this is what the church has been doing regarding IVF. So one of the problems of IVF is, excuse me, it does not cure the couple of their infertility. I think any couple suffering from infertility would love to be enabled to have children the normal way. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's much better to look at methods that actually do that try to heal the body instead of producing the child independently of the parents in a lab where they have no control of what is happening to their children, whether they're being frozen or destroyed or whatever. So,
and there are those alternatives.
And there are all those alternatives, like the Pope Paul VI Institute in Nebraska under Dr. Hilgers, who's developed NAPRA technology and done an amazing job, which anybody can look into online, and has a much higher chance of success than IVF has.
Mm-hmm,
so that's the irony that there's a much better method out there. So anyway, so science should be at the service of the human being, and it is not. And how can we tell that? So we already looked at the procedure somewhat and see how demeaning it is in many ways. You can also see, how little the life of the child is really taken into account. 12 million babies so far have been born throughout the world through IVF since 1978 when this started. And if you count about 10% chance of survival per child, so this is per child, not per cycle, per child, which is kind of optimistic, then a staggering 110 million of children have died in the process. It's what we can estimate. So that is just tremendous, and we wouldn't allow any other kind of medical procedure to go to be used with that kind of fatality rate, were it not that couples are so desperate and doctors are making a lot of money and don't know that there are other methods that would be much better. So I think we really, I understand from the inside the pain of couples who desperately want a child. That's the only thing that sort of will take away their pain. And IVF is given to them as the promised land, as that will obtain that. So apart from the fact that it's not certain that they will have a baby in the end, they also have to see that, do they want children at any cost, or do they only want children if truly this is in the context of love? Now, don't get me wrong. I think that couples who've had babies through IVF can be and often are absolutely wonderful parents who love their children and educate them, beautifully, and that's magnificent. But that doesn't do away with the fact that the procedure itself goes against the dignity of the human person and is actually a big sin and wound created potentially in those children. It's because the human beings are so infinitely precious that they need to be conceived, raised, and treated in a context of love. And we often fall short of that. But there are some methods like IVF that are intrinsically opposed to that dignity. They cannot be transformed. They cannot be baptized in a way. They cannot be suddenly meant to mean something different than they do. The children are turned into objects, are, produced in a lab. They're not immediately, conceived in the mother's and deposited in the mother's womb, and I think once you start to understand that a bit, and it is hard today because we're brought up in this culture where IVF has become the new normal, that we have a hard time understanding that, and therefore I really, really encourage the Catholics to read the documents of the Church on this, to try to understand better why the Church is saying that, and trust the Church, even if you don't quite see that yet, and to understand that really children deserve better, couples deserve better. We have the witnesses, as you were mentioning, Peggy, of many couples and also now grown-up people who've been conceived through IVF who say how traumatic it has been. And to realize we want the best for our children. We realize how important it is to treat our children well while they're in the womb. We sing to our children. We read our children. We try to avoid all trauma, all shock, all distress. And suddenly, conception is not supposed to be important. That doesn't make any sense. Conception is such a tremendously important moment when a human being comes into existence. And even if we assume, with memory, you shouldn't be able to remember that moment, and therefore it shouldn't really play. Well, there's, a cellular memory, I'd say, first of all. And secondly, we do have the witnesses of for example, a prenatal psychologist called Terry, who speaks about his experience with couples and their toddlers or young children who do seem to have some sort of traumatic memory of their siblings. And there's this one child who dreamt that she had, I think it was like 7 siblings. She could say how many brothers and how many sisters who were in a dark, cold place and who were crying for help. And that those were her frozen brothers and sisters. And then he quotes, he mentions the story of another child who's so pre-verbal, but who's in clear distress, and of course hasn't been told about the IVF procedure at all. And when the doctor holds up like a doll that looks like a baby at a certain spot, the child gets very distressed and starts crying and seems to remember a sibling. So, we don't know what children experience at that age, but whether they do or not, the point is that we should never do something that goes against the dignity of other human beings, and certainly not of our children. And I'd like to say to parents, they're asked something heroic here. They're asked here to act as parents without being parents as yet, namely wanting the best for their potential children, and therefore not going a route that is definitely wrong, is a sin against their children, against themselves, against their couple, and potentially very damaging. So, I know this is heart-wrenching, but I'd really encourage them to think this through.
Well, Marie, the second half of your book that we've mentioned a couple of times here, When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope, you focus in on the church's teaching, why the church, again, is not against science, but is for the dignity of the person. And I love the phrase you said, that children deserve to be conceived, raised, and treated with dignity and love. Conceived, raised, and treated with dignity and love. And parents need to be treated with dignity, and as well, potential parents in their desire for having children, in their treatment of infertility. And in the second part of your book, you also talk about the places where people can go and the ways that they can have life-affirming care and treatment for infertility. You mentioned the Pope Paul VI Institute, NAPRO Technology. You mention the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which, by the way, Marie's husband is the president, Joseph Meaney, of the National Catholic Bioethics Center in Philadelphia, which gives individual bioethical consults for free. There are many alternatives. I mentioned at the end of our last program, and we'll mention again, springsinthedesert.org. Marie, I know you know Kimberly Henkel, who's the developer of the program springsinthedesert.org, a Catholic infertility ministry, which also has a great section on their website for life-affirming alternatives when a couple is facing infertility. So there are other ways of both conceiving a child, which are, in fact, NAPRO technology much more successful than IVF in their conception rates, and that are really they're beautiful, loving ways that you can at least make every effort in terms of what science can do to help you conceive. So there are alternatives, and
Let me just give a few numbers here.
Okay.
So for the NAPRO technology of Dr. Hilgers, so women who had suffered from anovulation, a lack of ovulation, so 81.8% conceive through NAPRO technology. Then women suffering from endometriosis, which is very widespread today, so 56.7% achieve pregnancy, whilst only 21.2% with the same condition give birth after using IVF. So much higher rates. And again, they heal you, they enable you to have your children rather than producing your child for you. And who wouldn't prefer that?
Sure. They cure your infertility, basically,
Exactly.
by helping you conceive in the natural, loving way. And, we always have that shorthand for moral thinking. One shorthand is the end does not justify the means. The beautiful end of having children and being fruitful as a couple we need to say, do the means, these artificial reproductive technology means, do they justify? Are they justified when we're trying to achieve that end? So moral thinking really helps us think through the ends and the means as well. But Marie, we've just got really maybe a minute or so left. I want to focus on children that are born because they have been conceived through artificial means. What are we saying about the dignity of these children? God is present. Of course, when every child is conceived, they can't be conceived without God. He's part of the equation.
Yeah, he's part of the equation. He just bows humbly to our procedures, even if they're morally wrong.
Yes.
But of course, I mean, because every child is infinitely precious, however they were conceived, they are there and should be loved and deserve love. And for parents who've done this, there's always repentance and apologizing, and I'm sure that you're great parents to your children now. But it's important, I think, to acknowledge that something was wrong there at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And even if it's sort of hard to put wrap one's mind around that in a way one shouldn't have been had it not been for IVF. But, I think so many of us have to face the fact that perhaps our parents didn't really love each other or perhaps shouldn't have gotten married, and then we wouldn't be here either. So, once we hear we are infinitely loved, and therefore, go to God and rest on His heart and let Him heal your wound.
And God will heal, absolutely. Well, Marie, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for the great information you've provided, the inspiration, the resources. And please look also at the first program we did with Marie, Infertility, A Journey of Hope. You've been listening to the Family Sanctuary on St. Gabriel Catholic Radio, and I'm your host, Peggy Hartshorn. To find our program again and other programs from Family Sanctuary, go to stgabrielradio.com, choose podcasts, and then Family Sanctuary. Our program is broadcast at 4 o'clock on Saturdays and 2 o'clock on Sundays, right here on St. Gabriel Catholic Radio. So join us again to strengthen our families and make them sanctuaries of life as God intends.
Family Sanctuary is a production of listener-supported St. Gabriel Catholic Radio, AM 820. Archives of Family Sanctuary with Peggy Hartshorn are available at stgabrielradio.com.